So now it is my honor to introduce this year's commencement speaker, who is no stranger to Lynn. I'm going to freak everyone else out here and go off script for a moment because this morning I had an interesting experience that I want to share before I introduce Dr. Watson. Woke up this morning and do what everybody does. You reach for your phone, check all your emails, look at your news feeds, and it was an epiphany this morning for me watching Will Ferrell's University of Southern California commencement address. If you haven't seen that, it will make your day. It was quite remarkable. He was funny, as you can imagine. But at the end of his address, he actually sang a falsetto version of Whitney Houston's "I Will Always Love You." Now, I don't know if you're a singer, Dr. Watson, but I hear the man can rap. I will leave it at that. Dr. Robert Watson is a professor of American Studies in our College of Arts and Sciences, as well as an acclaimed author, noted media commentator, and passionate community activist. He has published more than 40 books, including the award-winning book America's First Crisis, and hundreds of scholarly articles, books, chapters, and essays. He is also the editor of SUNY Press's book series on the American presidents, and edits and directs the encyclopedia sets American Presidents and American First Ladies. Dr. Watson has convened half-dozen national conferences in the American presidency, moderated political debates and forums, delivered more than 1,500 keynote addresses, town hall programs, and lectures, and been interviewed by thousands of media outlets thousands of times. More recently, in the wake of the U.S. election that divided the nation, Dr. Watson developed Project Civitas here at Lynn. Its mission is to promote civility in politics and public life through education in and out of the classroom. And initiatives under this project include promoting January 21st as a National Day of Civility, having the mayor of Boca Raton declare March Civility Month, and for Boca Raton, that's a big deal. Encouraging leaders and communities to take the Civility Pledge, and hosting dialogues and civility programs which complement the university's Dialogues core curriculum. You are in for a treat. I know many students have had him as their professor before, but the rest of you get to today. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Robert Watson.
Don't worry, I'm not going to sing, but just for you, Dr. Ross. A lot of my students know I'm a big fan of Alexander Hamilton, so here goes. You can snap along. Are you ready? How does a bastard, orphan, son of a whore, and a Scotsman dropped in the middle of a forgotten spot in the Caribbean by providence, impoverished and squalor, grow up to be a hero and a scholar? The $10 founding father without a father got a lot farther by being a lot smarter, by working a lot harder. But that's enough. That's enough. So, Will Ferrell, take that. Lynn University. Next time, President Ross, get me a microphone to drop, and then we'll, okay. All right, that's the first and last rap at a commencement speech in history. President Ross, Miss Lynn, distinguished guests, platform committee, my colleagues, the faculty of Lynn, my wife and children, parents, and most importantly, you, the graduating class of 2017. This is a momentous occasion for you. I applaud you. Give yourselves a much-deserved round of applause. Some of you have been to commencement exercises before, others this is your first, but you already likely know that these commencement addresses are supposed to be high art. The university selects someone who has achieved a measure of accomplishment, supposedly. You listen, and then they drone on and on, espousing profound words of wisdom, words that you will no doubt remember for the rest of your lives. At least that's the idea. Now, I will admit, I don't remember anything my commencement speaker said when I graduated from college. And I suppose a lot of the professors and parents would admit the same. I do remember that he was the governor of Virginia, and everybody said he was going to be the next president of the United States. He even married the daughter of former President Lyndon Johnson. But shortly after that speech, he had one whopper of a scandal, and the presidency, of course, never happened. Now, I remember the details of the scandal, but I don't remember what he said. Here's what commencement speakers usually say. They tell you that you can cure cancer, that you will end racism, that you will end hunger, and prevent wars. Well, those are the most noble of goals, and we should all dedicate ourselves to achieving them. However, frankly, I'm not sure how realistic they are. They've been telling us we're going to do all that since well before I was a college student, and we're not, sadly, much closer to achieving them today. Then they close by predicting that you all will cure cancer within 10 years. They congratulate you, and then you applaud wildly. Well, this commencement speech will be a bit different, except, of course, for the wild applause at the end. This is a very special occasion for you, and like Calvin, I thought long and hard about what I wanted to say, and I want to try to do it justice. I decided I wanted to give you real advice that you really can use, and I wanted to offer words that you may actually remember. So, I want to share with you today just one simple bit of advice. It might not be as grand as unraveling the mysteries of the cosmos or curing cancer in 10 years, but I promise you, in a way, it is no less profound, because I believe it is the key to solving every issue facing us today. Moreover, it's something we all can really do, and not in 10 years, starting today. That done, I want to close by posing just a single challenge for all of you. Sound good? Good. And I hope you actually remember what we say. So I'm an historian. It's been said that historians are prophets in reverse. That is, we look to the past in order to understand the human adventure, to record the human narrative, and to try to predict the future. You see, one thing I've picked up along the way is this: history is always your best teacher. The past is prelude to the future. The stories of history never change, only the names of the characters. So no surprise to my students out there, my advice today comes from my 30 years spent reading, writing, and studying history. Historians are also professional storytellers of sorts, and storytelling is probably the oldest human art, and for good reason. It's difficult to memorize or remember a lot of things. The periodic table of elements, state capitals, mathematical formulas, but if you put it in the form of a story, we all remember it. That's the key to any great novel, movie, opera, or hopefully commencement speech. So therefore, appropriately enough, I'd like to tell you a story. My students, you thought you were done with my stories? Here's one more. It's a story from the Revolutionary War. One of the most intriguing battles of the war occurred on October 6, 1777, at a place called Germantown in Pennsylvania. It pitted old foes George Washington against the British General Sir William Howe. It was a particularly foggy and overcast day that day, and the smoke from countless artillery barrages just made it all the worse. In the poor conditions, the soldiers couldn't even see the enemy. They couldn't see the battlefield. It was chaotic, back and forth, and back and forth, and then that is when it happened. A little lost and frightened dog ran into the colonial camp. The soldiers that found the dog knew that their general, George Washington, loved dogs. At one point in his life, get this, Washington had over 30 dogs of all breeds and with such telling and affectionate names as Sweet Lips, True Love, Madam Moose, Tipsy, and Drunkard. One of his biggest dogs, named Vulcan, one day got into Mrs. Washington's smokehouse and ate the ham she had spent all day preparing for a great party. George thought it was hilarious. Mrs. W, not so much. That's when she told George, enough is enough with all the dogs. I don't care if you're the general, it's either me or the dogs. Let's just say Washington wrestled with the decision. Back to the story. Washington, missing his dogs, was thrilled to have the little pup brought into his command tent. And while playing with the dog, he noticed from the inscription on its collar that the dog belonged to his opponent, General Howe. So we told Hamilton to grab a quill, take a note, and he ordered Hamilton, get this, to walk across the battlefield, note in pocket, flag of truce in one hand, the pup in the other hand, and deliver the dog to General Howe, his opponent. You can say, "Aw," right now. That's right. General Howe was so touched by the gesture of humanity that he called off the rest of the fighting. Howe then contacts his superiors in England and the press and says, "We have Washington all wrong. He's not the backwoods brute unfit to lead an army against us. No, Washington is a true gentleman. The soldiers learned about this touching story and rallied behind their commander-in-chief. When the story reached the press, the public could not get enough of it. Even some of Washington's critics dropped their calls for his removal. Amazingly, this one cute little story had more to do with shaping Washington's early revolutionary image than almost anything else in the war. And the end is just as adorable. General Howe, the Brit, claimed that the little dog had become frightened and ran away to the colonial camp because he was attracted to the smell of bacon cooking in the camp. Washington offered a different version of the story. He said, no, it wasn't the smell of bacon that attracted the dog. It was the far sweeter scent of liberty. Now, Washington suffered a narrow defeat that day on the battlefield, but he won something much more. He showed himself and his cause to be above the conflict. As always, Washington claimed the moral high ground. And there's a lesson there. As any military commander or student of history knows, the high ground on the battlefield carries the battle. But the moral high ground wins the war, and the far bigger political prize. It forges the arc of history. Indeed, history is made by all sorts of people and for all sorts of reasons, but the truly meaningful, lasting, transformational changes and legacies from history come from people like Washington who embrace civility. That is the one point I want to talk about today. It's a simple one. The key to solving everything before us is civility. Before we can tackle any complicated issue, we first need to sit down and break bread with one another, treat one another with respect, and listen. Washington knew that the arc of history was favored those who embraced civility, and so did others. Those who struggled to end slavery, the visionary women who gathered at Seneca Falls in 1848 to promote equality, the women who inspired us recently with their march in Washington and all around the world, those who celebrated the very first Earth Day in 1970, they all had something in common. In pursuing social justice, they all took the high road. Their organizing principle, their pièce de résistance was civility. It must have been unimaginably difficult for Martin Luther King to be spit upon, heckled, beaten, and arrested simply for marching or sitting down at a lunch counter. And yet, he never threw a punch in retaliation or out of frustration. He remained civil. By not reducing himself to the level of his foes, King knew that when he achieved equality and took a seat at the table of brotherhood, that he would claim the high moral ground because he had acted with civility. And doing so, King, just like George Washington before him, shaped the arc of history. The late, great poet Maya Angelou once said, "History, despite its wrenching pain, cannot be unlived, but if faced with courage, need not be lived again." I would substitute the word civility for the word courage. Perhaps our greatest example of civility comes from our own founding fathers. The framers who gathered in Philadelphia in the hot, humid summer of 1787 faced an impossible challenge: how to build an altogether new form of government. They tried it the year before in Annapolis, but only 4 states sent delegates. They fought and walked out. So when they gathered the next year, the odds were against them. The stakes, you might say, were as high and grand as the egos, the tempers as hot as the weather. And what happened next at the beginning of that summer likely saved the convention, saved our Constitution, and I believe saved our young republic. They decided to first identify what they thought were the foundational principles of democracy. Then they were going to live by them and build them into the Constitution. What did they come up with? This is the framework for our democracy. They came up with 3 things: cooperation, compromise, and consensus. I call them the 3 C's of the Constitution: cooperation, compromise, and consensus. In short, civility. So they decided to build them into the Constitution. How? This may seem counterintuitive, but through conflict. By genius, they built conflict into the document. The House against the Senate, Congress against the President, courts against everyone, feds against the states, the President can nominate, the Senate must confirm, and the list goes on and on. not by mistake, but by design. Here's why. In a system based on conflict, the only way to move forward is what? Through cooperation, compromise, and consensus. The 3 C's. Our system of government is rooted in civility. So fast forward to today. We face a number of challenges in the U.S. and abroad, from Tallahassee to Washington, from Britain to Budapest. It seems that fear is replacing fact. Paranoia is replacing critical thinking. We now have fact-free politics and fact-optional news. And what's happening to our 3 C's? Politicians on all sides thump their chests, pledging never, ever to cooperate or compromise. Instead of seeking consensus, we either don't speak to one another or we scream at one another. Arguably, the greatest challenge we face is not just the civility in our politics, but in society. Reality TV, talk radio, road rage, hazing, video games, cyberbullying. So how does all this relate to you, the graduates of 2017? You're inheriting all this. A few years ago, scholars and news outlets proudly proclaimed that we were living in a post-racial society. Equality had prevailed over the age-old foe of bigotry. Your generation, unlike those before you, was remarkably free from all the baggage of hate, racism, homophobia, sexism, anti-Semitism. But our celebration appears to have been premature. All around the world, there has been a sad reaction to the progress. Xenophobia, jingoism, aggressive nativism are once again rearing their ugly heads, meaning that there is work still to be done by your generation. Likewise, just a few years ago, we were lauding the end of ideology. The world seemed to be rejecting authoritarianism, isolationism, militarism in favor of democracy, free trade, the free movement of people, the free exchange of ideas. But there's been a resurgence, sadly, of exclusion, division, and intolerance by governments around the world, meaning there is still work to be done by your generation. And we now face an existential threat to our very existence in the form of global climate change. But the real threat is not ecological, it's educational. Because rather than work together, united by our common humanity and the preponderance of scientific evidence, there's been a troubling rise of anti-intellectualism, anti-science, anti-rationality. I never thought I'd say this, but alarmingly, many people today do not believe in climate change, but they believe in Bigfoot. Many people do not believe in evolutionary theory, but they think pro wrestling is real. People are not vaccinating their children, but on every Groundhog's Day on February 2nd, they check to see if Puxatawny Phil saw a shadow. Meaning there is still work to be done, and by your generation. But there is hope and cause for optimism, and the answer is civility. In closing, your curriculum here at Lynn has prepared you to go out and pursue a course of civility. Your J-term in citizenship exposed you to community service. Your core curriculum, the dialogues, is rooted in the principles of civility. Think about it. Henry David Thoreau's civil disobedience, Gandhi's Satyagraha, MLK's letter from Birmingham jail, Sojourner Truth's Ain't I a Woman, Nelson Mandela's I Am Prepared to Die. Your education has prepared you to make a difference. I have great confidence in you, and your faculty and administration do as well. So on behalf of your faculty and administration, I want to pose a challenge for you, and it's not solving cancer in 10 years. Commencement speakers often challenge their graduates to pursue a life of accomplishment and success, but I want to challenge you to pursue a life of purpose, meaning, and service. Do not measure your accomplishments narrowly in materialistic terms only, but measure it by how you treat others. Embrace tolerance, inclusiveness, compassion. Respect your elders. Respect those who are a bit different from you. Practice common decency and courtesies. In short, I challenge you to pledge yourself to civility. And it's the little things. Don't just know the name of your boss. Learn the name of the custodial staff that tirelessly takes care of your office. Don't just amass and consume things. Shop for a better world by shopping your conscience. It's easy. It's all these little things. A hello, a thank you, opening the door. It always works. And then, one small civil act at a time, one person at a time, you really will change the world. You will forge the arc of history. I hope you remember what we say here today, and it's been an honor to have taught so many of you and address you. I congratulate you and wish you all the best. Thank you.